Thank you very much, George. I didn't mean to stand you up all these years, but I have to say thank you for a warm welcome this evening. It's been very interesting over the last, I'd say, 5 years now, speaking to societies pretty much all over the globe, between South Africa, Romania, Asia, and even some of the small towns in the US and Canada. The perceptions that we've accumulated over time really does follow some kind of trend. We do very much act in a herd. And to be able to stand out and say something bold is very difficult. All of the presenters today that I've been listening to very keenly had something value added in this one big picture. And despite a extended speaker presentation, you can definitely gather a little bit out of each one. The presentation I'm about to give you is very much, it's not esoteric, it's not practical, it has no formulas in it. I have a bad habit, actually a horrible hobby called collecting factoids. If there's a statistic, which some people call lies, I'm going to look for it and I'm going to piece it together. And in this whole sort of way, it's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. How many of you were 3 years old when you were young at one point in time in your life? How come some of you aren't raising your hand? If you were 3 years, everyone was 3 years old. Some of you what, skipped an age? This presentation is going to be a little interactive, so don't mind. So raise your hand. How many of you were at least 3 years old at one point in your life? And what was the #1 question you asked when you were 3 years old? Why? And then after you got the answer, what was the next question you asked? Why again, and again, and again? And as we get older, we stop asking that question because we take everything kind of for granted. This is the way it's supposed to be. How many of you read Aesop's Fables when you were younger? Did anyone read Aesop's Fables? Does anyone remember Aesop? Greek fable teller. He wrote this story about the ant colony, that there were 100 ants walking and collecting food for the winter. They would be all carrying the branch together. And there was one ant, a little larger mutation than everybody else, who was much stronger and was able to carry one branch all by himself. What did they do with that one ant? Does anyone know? Louder? They killed him. They killed that one ant. Why? Because of non-conformity. Forecasting is supposed to be a guess. And it's simply an educated guess. You've got to have some kind of justification. And the problem, there we go. The problem with an educated guess, it's still a random number. We're always going to be wrong. It's always an art. Our deep math skills might actually have a disadvantage. How many of you know an accountant or an actuary? Does anyone know an accountant or an actuary? What are they like? You can be honest. I have an uncle that's an actuary. What's their general personality stereotype? Boring? Boring. They love their cube. They absolutely love their cube. Don't they love numbers? And don't they have a twisted way of looking at things? Yeah. I'm thinking this way. My uncle, who's an actuary, thinks this way. We kind of meet to the same point, but totally two different perceptions. Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm wrong. But I have a funny thought that maybe artists might be better intuitive predictors than economists. Why? Because they have maybe a little mental disease. I don't know. But it's good to have a little mental disease because we're so much part of a consensus, herd theory, that if all of us are giving the same number, it's because we're all using the same formula, okay? And that causes a problem because that's why we can't tell the turning points. Going back to the Elliott wave theory presentation, I heard a presentation from a technical analyst in Vancouver, Canada, who said a very nice phrase. She said, she was a CFA charter holder. She said, you know what, I understand that most people are fundamentalists. I also understand that technical analysis could have some issues, but she said a nice line, there's someone out there that knows a little bit more information than you. When we get our CFA charter holder, what happens to our personality? Do we turn into Mr. and Mrs. Know-It-All? Do we get a little bit of an ego? Do we have a little more pride? And isn't pride one of those 7 deadly sins? Because that's what happens in forecasting. And we take a little bit more further. The question is, what do we need to do differently? I've studied the whole CFA. I've been teaching for years. I've been socializing with our membership for the last 5, 6 years. And I can tell you one thing, that we need to start from where the information starts. Numbers don't create themselves. The stock market doesn't give a number out of its own energy, out of its own creation. It starts with people. And to be a little bit of a psychologist might actually pay. Why watch people? Well, we're complicated. It's interesting. How many of you love watching soap operas? I was watching TV last night, and I saw tons of soap operas on TV being shown here in Prague. People love soap operas. How many of you watch reality TV? You can. I'm not going to shoot you. You can say. Reality TV. There's a huge passion toward it. It's addicting. It's human characteristics that are effectively driving long-run trends, which then drive forecasted numbers. Look at ourselves. We are human. How many of you are married? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you know that sometimes you just can't win every battle? It's a give and take. You're never going to be right. In fact, the woman's always right. When the women make about 95% of the buying decision in the home, including the suit, they're always right. Ode to Darwin, because it's his 200th birthday, as of February the 12th. Theory of natural selection. Who chooses the male? The women. Women are always right again, but no, I'm joking. The truth being said, this is where I'm starting to formulate a little different theory about natural selection. Who makes it, who doesn't? Who has the extra information? Now, where should we really start a little bit further? Is it really about people? Let's take a look at natural selection. History and natural selection repeats itself. We all know this, but how can we taste it? Each time it's with a different twist. I was reading National Geographic, and I tend to read about 40 magazines a month. It's one of my passions. But I was reading the National Geographic, the female peacocks are driving the choice of a mate based on the quality of the male's high maintenance feathers. Has nothing to do with finance, I apologize, but the male's feathers of a peacock are some of the most difficult to maintain. I mean, we think women are high maintenance. No, peacocks are high maintenance. And I will even say this, men are even more high maintenance than women. I'll give you a perfect example. The average number of shoes that a woman has, how many? Does anyone know? 2? 3? 20 clothes. Actually, closet manufacturers calculated 22 pairs of shoes that women have, of which half are black. Okay? Now, as far as men are concerned, if we ask the number of shoes that men have, that's where the number 2 shows up. Okay? 2 or 3 pairs of shoes. 1 dress, 1 tennis shoes, and 1 flip-flops, probably. Okay? But, you know, we don't really dress very well half the time anyway. But flip over. When a man buys a car, what's the characteristic that we look at first? Is it miles per gallon or miles per hour? Miles per hour. It's a ratio we look at. We will spend an extra $10,000 for a mere 60 extra horsepower in that car. Do you know how many shoes that can buy, effectively? It's pathetic. We know who's really high maintenance now. But take a look at this. The use of makeup, implants, Botox. We're doing more research in physical vanity than we are for the worst form of brain cancer. Why? I keep asking the question. We're always complaining. Why are we always complaining?